Hey, you. Yeah, you. Welcome to another episode of the Interventions Podcast. Remember, an intervention is a divine encounter with yourself, honey. Kind of like your future best self sitting across the table from the challenges you may be facing as your current self and confronting the obstacles that are kind of blocking the transition. So how do I start this podcast today? Well, if you ask someone about a problem or a challenge that they're experiencing, and if you ask them about the people who are also connected to that challenge, they will give you a detailed account of the situation, honey, the perpetrators, the time of day, who was where, when, who said what. It'll be like a CSI crime scene investigation going on. They're going to have all the details. There's also going to be a clear victim and a clear villain. And who do you think in their story the victim is going to be? Well, let me tell you. The problem that you are facing is not your enemy. In fact, I believe by the end of this podcast, you're going to discover why that problem or challenge is actually your friend. Your real enemy is your reaction to the issue. Hang on, sis. It'll all make sense in a minute. You know what I notice? When I record these episodes, I use the word you a lot. But the truth is, I need to start working in the word we. Because without a doubt, if there's ever a topic to talk about on my heart, it's because I also need to hear it as well. I mean, this work of mastering ourselves is a lifelong work. I mean, it's even silly to think we ever actually arrive anywhere. That's why it's called a journey. Because if you make the mistake of thinking, yeah, you know what? I think I'm good. I think I have what I need here. I'm good to go. Man, that is the beginning of life throwing you some new lessons to whip you back into understanding that this is absolutely a journey. There's always some little back dark room with a little dust on the floor that needs to be swept out or addressed. There's always room for improvement. And I will continue to consider this podcast a very personal journey for me that I'm essentially choosing to walk out in a very public way. I'm absolutely a consumer of my own content. So if I am unable to drop the habit of saying the word you so much, believe me when I say it's truly we. All right. So getting to the topic today. Many years ago, I recall hearing a first responder discuss how some emergency situations didn't have to be fatal. It didn't have to end in a tragedy, but the victims in those situations had panic reactions that caused them to make choices that sealed their fate. They turned into a fatality. And it was funny because after I heard that a few times, because after I heard it the first time, then I heard it a few more times, I started doing little things like quietly preparing for emergency situations. I was like, you're not going to get me caught up out here dying when I don't need to. Don't play with me. I was, all those little safety shows they have on TV, safety infomercials. Child, if I was flicking through the channels, I would stop right there and be like, what are they talking about today? Oh, okay, fire escape ladder. Thank you. But it brought to the forefront in my mind how important our reactions are, not just the thing that triggered the reaction. Because to bring it back to the topic, I started having my first real thoughts about how our reactions can seal our fate when it comes to personal challenge and the people associated with those challenges, not just emergencies as the first responders were talking about. So then TD Jakes came along one year and said, don't make a permanent decision to deal with a temporary problem. And that really triggered me to eventually started paying attention to how I reacted to everything, not just to the potential of an emergency situation. And I noticed a pattern. When I looked at the way I reacted to challenges and to people who I felt were challenging me, I noticed that when the smoke would clear around those situations, how important it was for me to take accountability for how my choices affected the outcome. Because it's so easy to identify the villain out there, but it is deeply and far more inconvenient to address the potential villain within. I mean, none of us are all good, just like none of us are all bad. So believe me when I tell you, there is the potential for you to also be a villain character in your own story. And for me, because if you know anything about the ego is the part of you, people consider it the bad part, the negative part, but it's really the part of you that protects you from harm, especially emotional harm. And I consider my ego a pit bull of an ego that protects a scared little girl looking at life through a filter of fear, often reacting to perceived threats as if they're real. And, if there was a way to turn that into a cartoon, it would kind of look like someone running from their own shadow. That's how I describe my ego, because sometimes you got to open up and be honest about your potential and who you are and why you get triggered and how sometimes it's not the villain out there. And the perfect example of how my ego can sometimes take over my ears in a conversation, several months ago, my youngest son looked into the family calendar and saw that I had a bunch of workouts in the calendar because I'm not driving to the gym. I'm choosing to work out at home. So I went on this journey by myself and he started asking me a lot of questions about it. What kind of workout is it? What kind of exercises are they doing? And in my mind, I perceived him as setting up to criticize what I was doing. Because, as a little boy, that's kind of what he did. He would ask a lot of questions and then get to the point where he had asked the questions because he was kind of using them as ammunition, right? So here we are. He's an adult. I'm an adult. But my ego is now listening to him asking these questions. And I'm thinking, oh, great. Here it comes. He's telling me I'm not working out often enough, or he's going to tell me I'm not losing enough weight. I perceived him as about to harm me emotionally, because that's what my ego said was going on. But you know what surprised me? At the end of the line of questioning, after I chose not to react, because my ego wanted to say, what's this all about? But at the end of the questioning, he said, you know what? I saw your workouts in the family calendar, and I was so proud that you took the initiative to do this by yourself, because it can be a challenge getting back onto a workout regimen. And I've been lazy since I graduated from school. And he said, because I see what you're doing, I wanted to know if you would like to team up and we get a workout program going together that's going to keep us both inspired and encouraged to stick to it. I was blown away at how wrong I was about what I was hearing. And I immediately realized that was my ego listening. I wasn't even listening. And the problem with it is, if I had reacted according to what my ego told me was about to go down, that conversation would have been crappy. That conversation would have gone nowhere. And you know what? I would have actually harmed him because he wouldn't have understood why I was reacting to him in that way. I held my response, and beauty came from that. Because like I said, it wasn't me for a moment listening to his words at all. It was just a scared young woman who felt like she would never be thin enough to be loved and accepted, because that's where my ego was when the questions about the workouts started. I'm grateful that I chose peace in that moment, because I could have made an enemy of him as an innocent bystander, reacted in some crazy way. And when I say crazy, not outlandish, but reacted in a way that didn't fit the conversation. And I could have escalated what should have been and turned out to be a benign and very positive interaction. And guess what? I would have been at fault for ruining my own day. Think about it. He wasn't my enemy in that moment. My reaction that my ego was building up, that would have been my enemy in that exchange. Can you think of times that may have been you? See, and of course, now we're talking about someone who meant well and how our reactions could have turned that into a not so great exchange. But that begs the question, okay, what about people who are trying to hurt me? Everyone is not coming to me in good faith, even though I think most people do, but everyone is not coming in good faith. What am I supposed to feel about that? Well, first of all, let's clear this up. Feeling versus acting. Because I know that if you ask someone the question, wow, why are you behaving that way? They'll often respond, don't I have a right to feel this way? You see how they just use the words feel and act interchangeably? Listen, if we acted how we felt all the time, there would be a whole lot of folks walking around in the United States and probably abroad with my handprint on their faces. I mean, you could walk up to them and see my fingerprint, because how I feel is not interchangeable with how I act. See, wisdom, self-control, emotional intelligence, good mental health, self-awareness, self-regulation, those are the kinds of things that should be standing between how you feel and how you act. We are in control of our reactions. And there's a reason why we don't act on all of our feelings. See, you can't help how you feel. And I'm telling you now, this conversation is not about you stuffing the way you feel about something. Because the truth is, however you feel about it, it's valid. If you're angry, that's a valid feeling. If you're sad, if you're frustrated, if you're ready to flip the table, you're valid, boo. See, your feelings are signals, but those signals are feedback signals for you. Your feelings are like the thermometer taking your internal temperature. Your feelings highlight opportunities for you to learn, grow, and master yourself. Now, does this mean you always act with peaches and cream and roses? Listen, I'm not saying everyone deserves the beauty and the grace of your other cheek when you get into situations and challenges with folks and folks are giving you their ass to kiss. Listen, if somebody robs you, run them in court. Nobody said you had to forgive that. Nope, that's what the law is here for. If someone harms you physically, I'm running you straight to jail. I'm not giving you the other cheek to damage. We're not doing that today. But do you really want to cuss out your boss and lose your job on the spot when you have 3 kids to feed, regardless of how you feel in the moment? This is what I mean about wisdom and self-control and all of those things standing between how you feel and how you act. So in other words, if somebody is clearly trying to hurt you, you still need to regulate your reaction. But how? See, the whole purpose of dealing with how you react to the vicissitudes of life has nothing to do with being a nice person or looking like a nice person or sparing folks in any kind of way. It's for your own wellness. So your choices that come out through your actions and reactions don't become the reason you don't get what you say you want. That's important. I need to say that again. The reason you want to monitor and master the way you react and respond to challenges, including any one person associated with that challenge, is so your choices don't become the reason you don't get what you say you want. You want peace? Okay. You may have to explore why you have combative responses or often find yourself in conflicts with people. You want positivity? That's a good one. Listen, you have to explore your propensity to take a negative view of things. Listen, if your story is anything like mine, you may need to deal with painful and traumatic experiences that left you feeling unsafe, because I have come to realize more often than not, if you're talking to a negative person, you're also talking to a person who doesn't feel safe because of things that life has inflicted upon them. Do you want rest? You say you want rest. Well, if you're that person, you might have to explore why you can't say no to folks. You can't make an enemy of the folks that are asking you for stuff, because they're not at fault here. Because if your reaction is to always say yes, your reaction is your enemy, not the people making all their demands. Examine why you can't establish a boundary with a strong and resolute no. Make this feeling that you have, make the reaction that you have an opportunity to explore you, as opposed to taking aim and being in conflict with the people who are asking you for stuff and you really don't want to do it. Because that kind of person, this was once me. What do we typically do when we want rest but we can't say no? We typically start to resent the people we're helping. How about, do you want to eat? Well, learn to respect the authority under which you work while you're working on your escape plan. You're going to hatch an escape plan. Good for you. But you're going to have to master your reactions to the authority that you work under if you want to eat. This is what I mean about your reactions having nothing to do with sparing someone else or turning the other cheek. It's about What about my reactions are getting me what I say I want out of life? Or what about my reactions keep creating these speed bumps, pulling me further and further from the things I said I want to get out of this life? Use how you feel as a trigger and an opportunity to grow. Yes, your reaction can seal your fate. And how many of y'all, within the sound of my voice, need to stage an intervention with yourself right now about this very thing? Because you have a durable challenge in your life and you keep reacting to it the same exact way. And you keep getting the exact same outcome, the one you said you didn't want. And instead of dealing with that internally, you're taking aim at the objects outside of you, the people, the circumstance, the places, the this, the that. You will never gain mastery of this challenge in that way. This is you receiving permission from me to do exactly what I do in my interventions. And that's begin to challenge how your reaction is creating the outcome you don't want. Now, at the beginning of this podcast, I said your reaction becomes your enemy, more so than the actual people or challenges. But I also took it further and said, because now the problem or the challenge can become your friend. Here's where I want to qualify that. Oh gosh, 17 years ago, my ex-husband left me for another woman. Additionally, there have been decades of issues in my family of origin. I also waited until a certain point in my life, after my first marriage ended, years after that, to enter into a relationship. And it turned out that I had an abusive boyfriend. At no point did any of this feel good. The husband, the family, the abusive ex-boyfriend, at no point did any of that feel good. But I have since become so thankful for how those things shaped me based on how I chose to respond. Those challenges, coupled with how I chose to react, they transformed me into, I consider myself peaceful, grateful, empathetic, kind, generous, joyful, compassionate, full of grace. Those things transformed me into that. I cannot look back and say I regret any of it. And even though none of it felt good in the moment, I'm telling you right now, those situations are my friend because they gave me something that I could not have gotten on my own. They gave me a challenge that gave me a choice to respond well or to respond poorly. Because the truth is, how I felt about those things became a signal, the alarm. And that alarm was going off, telling me about the storms that were raging inside of me. And I took aim at that. It would be a completely different story if, and I wouldn't be sitting here today having this conversation if I had allowed anger or sadness or fear. If I allowed any of that, if I directed my energy to attacking those people outside of me, the people who, if you knew the whole story, you'd absolutely go, yeah, that person was a villain in this story. I chose to take ownership of any kind of way that I contributed to those circumstances. And I decided to focus on what it was about me that attracted those circumstances and what kind of mirror did those circumstances hold in front of me, giving me an opportunity to become a new person. Frankly, when you're at odds with other people in the first place, it's not personal. The things that they're saying and doing are coming from their own ego, from their own pains, from their own traumas. They're making choices that have nothing to do with you, although they're hurting you. And sometimes the only work left for you to do is to secure your mental health. There's nothing to be done about their choices. And when their choices are painful or traumatic or abusive or otherwise harmful to you, sometimes you just have to secure yourself. That's the work that you're called to do. It may be a work that they're not doing, but even in your reaction, as opposed to taking aim at someone who knows not what they do, sometimes the reaction is to just care for yourself in a meaningful way. Sometimes that's all it takes. This is what I mean when I say your challenges can be your friend, and to not allow your reaction to your challenges to become your enemy. See, listen, you don't even have to be a Christian to know the story of David and Goliath. You know, the big giant Goliath, and David with his little trusty slingshot took out this giant and saved the whole town, became king, blah, blah, blah. You know how it goes. David chose to respond to Goliath with faith and power. He was resolute about it. And although some would call Goliath a villain in that story, it's because of Goliath that David was king. The challenge and his response made him a king. And what I'm suggesting here is the way we respond to challenges can make us kings and queens, or it can leave us paupers. It's truly up to us. See, the idea is to be self-aware enough that you're behaving in ways that get you what you want out of life, whether it's peace, joy, happiness, compassion. You don't want to be the reason your challenges escalate or you send the whole circumstance into a ditch. Listen, life is hard enough without that. Just throw the whole scenario in the trash. I mean, you may feel justified in the moment, having low vibration reactions and responses to challenges, but the price is to contribute as an architect of your own suffering. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the situation brought, the challenge brought, or if people outside of you brought their bullshit to the table. What matters is what you choose, because what you choose has to benefit you. It has to benefit your life, your integrity. It has to benefit what you want out of life. It has to provide what you need out of life. That's really all there is to be said about that. And I might catch a little flack for this, but that's all right, because I always tell you, listen, you never know what version of me you're going to get in an episode of this podcast. And right now you're about to get Auntie. You know, the auntie who has her own personal bottle of Crown Royal when she comes to the cookout and you don't touch it. Listen, let me tell you this, because this used to be me. And I only say this with love. If you're a grown ass person and you are still talking about how other grown ass people are the reason you behave a certain way, why don't you just say, I don't have the bandwidth or the ability to hold on to my own sovereign power. I give it away to other people all the time. Don't tell me how someone else is causing you to choose things that aren't benefiting you or your mental health or your life. Don't do it. If that is your response to the things that go on around you, whether it's a parent, a friend, a boss, or anyone else, remember, your reaction is your choice. There's never a time that another adult has forced you to react in any kind of way. That's a high-level way of giving away your power, and let's not do that. Choose your reactions wisely. Man, I love y'all for real. Listen. Stop by the website at hawabond.com. Go to the podcast page and leave feedback on this episode for me. I'm not kidding when I say I really want to hear from you. I choose to present topics here at this podcast to start a conversation, not to dominate a conversation. This is why I always invite you to opt in when you leave your feedback to be considered for a future collective intervention on the very topic. I want to put panels of people together that hear this topic. I'm not trying to, dominate this conversation for an hour and just talk into your ear. No, I want to present this topic as a very private conversation I've had with myself and invite you to continue that conversation in small discussion panels, maybe 6 people or less. That would be fantastic, because I'm sure you have something very unique and valuable to bring to this discussion that could help someone else. And listen, if you have a friend dealing with a challenge or 2 or 10, like most of us are, share this episode with them. This might seriously give them the encouragement, the strength, or just the damn courage to tweak the way they're responding to their challenges so they can experience a victory. All right? Like I said, I love y'all for real. Until next time.